Tonight, we're setting sail into the past, far across the warm waters of the Indian Ocean, on quiet wooden ships carved by hand. Somali sailors once drifted beneath the stars, carrying stories, spices, and ancient wisdom across the waves. But what did they eat? How did they nourish their bodies and spirits during long, sun-swept voyages from the Horn of Africa to the farthest ports of Arabia, India, and beyond? In this episode of Boring History for Sleep, we'll gently explore the rhythms of sea life, the meals, the customs, the quiet hunger, and the simple joys found at sea centuries ago. So, before we get too comfortable, make sure to like, subscribe, and let us know in the comments what kinds of sleepy stories you'd like to hear next. Now, tuck in, close your eyes, and let the tide of time carry you softly away. The wind came slowly that morning, not with a shout, but a whisper. It touched the sun-baked hulls of the waiting ships, lifted the corners of canvas sails, and stirred the smell of salt and wood and old rope. In the ancient Somali port town of Zyla, on the far northwestern edge of the Horn of Africa, a quiet harbor waited to wake. Boats sat bobbing at their moorings, their ribs creaking softly with every wave, like the sighing of an old sailor remembering home. And there, in the long, golden hush of dawn, a crew moved slowly, barefoot and wrapped in loose robes faded by wind and time. The sailors of this humble vessel gathered their final bundles: a sack of sun-dried dates, a clay pot sealed with fish oil and beeswax, a coil of palm rope still damp with seawater, their tools, their rations, their prayers, all tucked neatly aboard a narrow, sturdy boat called a beadon, hand-sewn from planks and lashed with rope, sailing without nails, only knowledge. This was no grand fleet, no war-bound armada, just a trading vessel, bound eastward, toward the Arabian coast, toward Gujarat, toward whatever winds would permit. There was no hurry. These sailors had no clocks, only stars, currents, and the feel of weather in their skin. Captain Malam Yaba, a broad-shouldered man with quiet eyes, stood by the tiller as the crew readied the sail. He chewed a stick of miswak, cleaning his teeth without rushing. Around him, men murmured in Afmai and Somali, sprinkled with stray Arabic, languages shaped by waves, salted by generations of trade. They had done this before. A boy named Idil was new, 14, perhaps, or 15. No one had asked. He carried a pot of something wrapped in wet cloth, ginger root steeped in date syrup, not for trade, but to ease nausea when the sea grew rough. He had packed it himself. His mother had whispered the recipe before dawn. Now, Idil stood barefoot on the wooden planks, watching the sun rise over the water. He had never seen the ocean from this angle before. From the edge of leaving, they set off without drums, without ceremony, just the slow push of poles against the sand below, and the release of canvas into the morning wind. The beadon turned, groaned, and slid away from Zyla, carrying its crew into silence. Behind them, the smell of goat stew and roasting flatbread faded, replaced by open air, salt, and the first sting of hunger. Sailing on the Red Sea was not about speed. It was about patience, about reading clouds, watching birds, listening to wood and rope speak in their own language. They would sail until the wind changed. Then they would anchor and wait. By midday, the sun was high and sharp. The deck grew hot underfoot. Sweat pooled under the cloth of their tunics. And still, no one asked for food. Eating at sea was never taken lightly. They would ration dates by the moon's cycle. They would soak old bread in fish broth and eat it cold. They would chew cardamom husks to keep their minds clear, and drink tamarind water to cool the tongue. But not yet. First, they sailed, and they listened to the ocean, to each other, and to the stories the wind might bring. As evening approached, Idil sat near the prow, his back to the darkening horizon. Captain Malim passed him a palm-wrapped bundle. Inside, a slice of dried shark meat, coated in ground sesame and crushed black pepper. "Eat slowly," the captain said, his voice like weathered wood. "We have many nights ahead." The boy nodded. He tore the meat in small pieces, letting each chew soften before swallowing. Salty, tough, warming, food. Yes, but also a map. The beginning of knowing the sea. The wind had settled into a rhythm now. Not a gust, not a gale, but a low, constant hush, like someone gently breathing behind the sails. The boat creaked like an old man rising from bed. Its seams stretched and whispered as water lapped against its sides. By now, Zyla was no more than a memory. The scent of goat stew had long since vanished. Only the open sea remained, and the deep quiet that comes with it. On board, the men were still. No chatter, no songs, just soft movement, bare feet stepping across worn planks, the rustle of tunics, the faint groan of the mast as it tilted in the breeze. The sun stood high again today, pressing its light into every surface. Even the sea looked tired, its surface glazed like polished clay. They had left with enough food to survive, not to feast. Survival at sea was a quiet ritual, and its first rule was this: fire was not your friend. No flame was lit on board. The wooden hull, dry rope, and canvas sails were too easily tempted by sparks. Instead, meals were prepared before departure, soaked, smoked, sun-dried, or salted, each ingredient folded in upon itself, as ready as a prayer before sleep. Idil, the boy, sat cross-legged under a patch of sailcloth, his eyes red from squinting into the wind. In his lap, a small palm-leaf basket, tightly lidded. Inside were dried lentil cakes, cracked and folded from the weight of the sun. Beside him, the eldest sailor, called Bashir, sat peeling thin shavings of tamarind bark into a water gourd. He poured in a splash of seawater, then added the juice of a preserved lime, cracked and leaking from its skin. He passed the gourd to Idil. "Drink slow," he said. The boy did as he was told. The mixture was sour, sharp, and oddly grounding. It made his mouth water, his belly growl, and somehow that was comforting. They ate in shadows, never all at once. A sliver of dried banana here, a broken flatbread dipped in oil there. Tiny bites, measured chewing. This was not punishment. It was custom, to eat little, often, and in silence, to not tempt the sea with the fullness of your belly. Later that afternoon, a sound rose from the front of the boat. Not speech, not a shout, but singing, low and steady, a hum before a storm. It was Malim, the captain. His voice rasped like stone on wood. He sang a song his father taught him, of dolphins guiding lost ships, of lemons drying in the sun, of dried dates shared between men who had nothing left but sky and salt. The crew joined in, one by one, their voices like coals, glowing, not blazing. It was not for entertainment. It was to anchor the heart. As dusk approached, the sky softened. The light turned honeyed, warm. Birds passed overhead. Frigates, black and silent. A good sign. Land would come. Eventually. But not tonight. Dinner was modest. The crew sat in a loose circle, the boat swaying gently beneath them. A bowl of fermented camel's milk was passed hand to hand, each sailor taking only a sip. It was sour, thick, alive. They dipped dry bread in it, softening each bite with slow, deliberate care. Some chewed crushed dates, others nibbled on salted fish skin. No complaints, no comparisons, just quiet gratitude. Ideal watched, learning the rhythm. It wasn't just food they consumed. It was memory, a link to land, to mothers and wives and sisters, who had wrapped these bundles with their own fingers. Every bite was a letter from home, unfolded slowly with the tongue. Later, wrapped in his shawl beneath the flapping sail, Ideal closed his eyes. The ocean rocked him gently, and the taste of lime and lentils lingered on his breath. He was not full, but he was no longer afraid. The moon rose like a coin, cool, silver, and perfectly still. Its reflection stretched across the water, in long threads of light, woven quietly into the sea. The beacon floated without a sound, its sail slack, its oars drawn in. All around, there was only the hush of water, and the gentle creak of rope, tightened by the night breeze. It was time to catch what the sea would offer, but not with nets, and never with noise. Malim, the captain, had watched the moon for hours. He knew when it was right, when the tide would turn, when the fish would rise. He stood at the edge of the boat now, his hands gripping a long reed pole, tipped with woven mesh. No bait, no hook, just rhythm and patience. The crew understood. No torches, no shouting, not even whispers. Each man had his place, his task. Even Ideal, the boy, was given a role, to hold a clay bowl filled with crushed shell powder, used to distract and scatter the fish, steering them toward the traps. Their tools were made long ago, passed down, mended, blessed. Tiny basket traps shaped like hourglasses, smeared with date sap and lime juice. The scent lured the curious. The shape did the rest. The traps were lowered gently into the sea, held by thin palm cords wrapped around calloused fingers. The fishermen waited, breath shallow, muscles still. They listened. The ocean was alive, but not loud. It hummed with small things, currents, the finned flick of passing fish, the roll of plankton beneath the surface. Above it all, the sky watched, clear, cool, endless. Hours passed. Then, a gentle tug, a ripple, a shift in the cord's weight. Ideal's eyes widened. Malim nodded once. Slowly. No words. One by one, the traps were lifted, and in them, slim, silver fish, no longer than a finger, shimmering, twitching, glinting under moonlight. Enough. Just enough. They worked in silence. No celebration. Just respect. The fish were laid on palm fronds and dusted with ash. No fire tonight. They would dry in the wind, preserved by salt and thyme. A few were crushed immediately, bones, flesh, and all, mixed with preserved lime and sesame oil, to make a thick, savory paste. This would be breakfast, spread on bread, eaten with the fingers, not to be wasted. Later, the crew rested. No one spoke of the fish. They were grateful. That was enough. Ideal fell asleep with sea dust on his hands, his fingers still smelling of lime and brine. His dreams were soft, full of moonlight and scales, and the quiet satisfaction of having helped. Not far away, Bashir sat awake, rubbing shark oil into a frayed corner of the sail. He looked out over the water, and whispered a prayer, not of thanks, but of memory, to all those who fished before him, and all who never came back. The coastline came into view like a memory, faint at first, shifting through haze and sea mist, then slowly forming into palm trees, docks, and distant rooftops catching the sun. It was early morning. The sky was still pale, the light unsure of itself. The crew of the Beedon had not spoken much at dawn. There was work to do, sails to trim, cargo to ready, and faces to wash with cold seawater. They were drawing near to a harbour, not one as grand as Aden, nor as dense as Mogadishu, but a coastal inlet known by seasoned traders, marked by its crooked dock and soft-coloured mud walls. Here, food was not just eaten, it was bargained for. As the boat slid into the port, children on shore ran barefoot along the rocks, calling out greetings, pointing at the vessel with excitement. Vendors stirred behind makeshift stalls, their wares still covered with linen cloth. And the air, it changed. It smelled not only of salt, but of cinnamon, of crushed garlic, of roasting grains and fish stock left simmering since nightfall. It smelled like arrival. Captain Malim directed the crew with subtle gestures. They unloaded bundles of dried fish, coils of rope, small vials of frankincense wrapped in reed, all of it arranged on wide, clean cloths near the edge of the dock. Idil followed Bashir, his arms carrying a parcel of salted shark paste. They laid it out in small, neat pyramids, preserved, fragrant, and valuable. Traders approached, not with haste, but with the curiosity of men who had smelled sea salt for years, and knew its worth. Negotiation, here, was its own language. There was no shouting, no finger-pointing, just slow nods, careful questions, and the weighing of hands in the air. Silver coins were rare. More often, trade was made in kind. A bundle of dried lemon in exchange for 2 knots of cured fish, a small sack of rice for a reed basket soaked in oil, 1 jar of spiced lentil mash for 6 strips of shark meat. It was measured not only by weight, but by need. Food was offered in little tastes. A trader sliced a fig open with his thumbnail, held it out without a word. Captain Malim took a piece, tasted it, then raised his eyebrow. Dried too long. The deal was silent, but declined. Another handed a palm-sized cake made of date, honey, and flour. It was dense and sticky, a sailor's cake, made to last. That one. Yes. They took 4. Idil watched closely. He noticed how Malim never looked desperate. He never reached first. He waited, as though time itself belonged to him. Eventually, they were offered something rare, a bundle wrapped in soft cloth, tied with a braid of black goat hair. Inside, dried mango slices, chewy and gold, still holding the scent of the sun. They were meant to be gifts, but Malim traded for them anyway. He said only, "These will keep a tired man standing." As the sun climbed, the bartering quieted. Their deck was heavier now, with bundles of flatbread, lentil cakes, spiced legumes, and dried goat meat rubbed in rosemary and ash, all of it packed in reed and palm, tied by the same knots their ancestors had used. They did not overfill. The sea punished greed, just enough to last, just enough to share. Before departing, the men were offered one final thing, not for barter, but as payment. A story. An old man near the dock squatted by their vessel, hands rough and brown from spice work. He told of a shipwreck, how a trader had overfilled his boat with fermented fish, and the weight had cracked its ribs at sea. He said the fish washed ashore, feeding gulls for days. But not the sailors, he added. Then he stood, waved once, and walked away. Ideal stared after him, the story nesting inside him. It wasn't just about weight. It was about knowing what to carry, about leaving room for water, for wind, for silence. That night, anchored just beyond the mouth of the harbor, the crew ate warm lentil mash pressed into soft bread, seasoned with dried cumin leaves from the trade. They ate slowly, by moonlight, with no more to be said, and the sea, as if satisfied, rocked them gently to sleep. The morning was too quiet. The sky had no birds. The air, once warm and full of scent, now felt hollow, as though something had drawn a deep breath and held it. Malim stood at the bow, his eyes fixed on a low dark line, gathering at the horizon. The wind had changed. It no longer sang. It whispered in short, sharp gasps, snatching at the sail with growing impatience. A storm was coming. The crew moved quickly, but without panic. They had faced storms before, but none were welcome. The beaten sail was rolled and tied. Ropes were checked twice, then again. Anything loose was lashed down. Water gourds were tucked between woven mats. Food parcels were stacked in the lowest hold. Malim spoke just 3 words. Balance is everything. By mid-morning, the sky had turned grey, not with softness, but with warning. Clouds crouched low, their bellies heavy and slick. The air turned cold, and then the wind hit, not with a scream, but a shove. The sailcloth snapped. The boat leaned left. Water slapped its side like an open hand. The crew gripped the sides. Some closed their eyes. Ideal, though young, did not cry. He watched Malim instead. Waves rose like buildings, then fell. Rain began, first in specks, then in ropes. The sea was no longer rocking them. It was testing them. Inside the hold, water began to creep. It pooled at the edges, then rose in quiet inches. And that's when the choices had to be made. Bashir, soaked and trembling, opened the cargo wrap. One by one, he laid out the food bundles. Each had taken effort. Each had been earned. But survival wasn't about what you wanted. It was about what you were willing to lose. Malim crouched beside him, his palm pressed against the boat's deck. measuring how she groaned under the weight. Then, gently, he picked up a bundle of dried banana slices. He looked at it for a long moment, then tossed it into the sea, not out of waste, but out of balance. Ideal watched in disbelief. Then came another, a wrapped jar of date paste, and another, a tightly rolled sheet of flatbread, gone, one by one. Each splash sent a pang through the crew. Not just hunger, but memory. Those foods had faces, mothers who packed them, sisters who dried them, traders who exchanged them with care. Now they were sacrifices, gifts to the sea. The storm raged for hours, but the beadle held. Her ribs strained, but did not crack. When the wind began to tire, when the rain softened to mist, and the sky peeled back just enough to show a silver edge of light, then, and only then, did the crew breathe. They were still wet, still cold, but they were alive. By evening, the sea had calmed, not flat, but forgiving. Malim stood at the stern, watching the horizon. No words, only silence. Then he turned back, unwrapped one remaining parcel, 3 small lentil cakes, pressed tight together. He broke each one in half, passed the pieces to the crew, evenly. Ideal held his in both hands, dry, cold, but precious. They ate slowly, gratefully. Every bite now meant choice, not just to survive, but to endure with dignity. The stars returned, shy at first, then bold, wrapped in damp shawls. The sailors rested. No one complained. They knew that in throwing food away, they had made space for each other, and for the sea, to let them pass. The sea had grown still, as if it too were tired from the storm's rage. In the soft grey light of dawn, the beacon drifted past a curve of coastline that none aboard recognized. It wasn't marked on Malim's chart, but the sea sometimes whispered secrets, only to those who listened long enough. There, tucked between 2 rocky arms, was a narrow inlet, half hidden by leaning palms, and a pale stretch of beach, untouched by footprints. A quiet island, uninhabited, at least by people. The crew guided the boat inward, its hull barely kissing the waves. Here, the air was warm again, sweetened by moisture, lightened by birdsong, 1,000 tiny sounds, woven into a blanket of green silence. Malim gave a quiet nod. "This is where we rest," he said, not with joy, but with deep, cautious relief. They made landfall gently. The sand was soft under bare feet, still cool from the night. Ideal was the first to spot them, small clusters of bright green leaves, growing close to the ground, each crowned with a delicate white blossom. He touched one, then looked to Bashir, who knelt beside him and sniffed the plant. "A wild herb," Bashir murmured, "good with hot water, soothes the belly." They gathered only what they needed, filling a single cloth sack, never pulling too many roots, leaving plenty behind. The sea taught respect. So did land. Further inland, they found coconut palms. The old ones climbed slowly, feet wrapped in wet cloth, hands calloused and confident. 3 coconuts, then 4, then 7. Water for the day, milk for the youngest, shaved meat to mix with lentil flour. The fire they built was small, just driftwood, just enough. They boiled a handful of lentils, with herbs, coconut, and sea salt. The scent rose upward, earthy, rich, and soft as the wind. Idil watched the pot as it steamed. His stomach grumbled, but he did not ask. He had learned by now. Waiting was part of eating. When Malim finally ladled the stew into palm leaf bowls, he said nothing, but each bowl was full, even. They sat beneath the palm trees, barefoot, quiet, spooning warm, fragrant stew into tired mouths. No one spoke. They only chewed and breathed. It was the first hot meal since the storm. That evening, they walked the shore. The island's tide had drawn back, leaving behind half-buried clams, tiny crabs, and long ribbons of seaweed that smelled faintly of ginger. Idil picked up a smooth stone, carved his name into the sand. The waves took it away before it was finished. He smiled. That, too, was balance. As dusk folded over the island, Malim told a story of his own father, lost at sea many years ago, of how he once came upon an island like this, a place of brief refuge, where salt turned sweet for a while. "We don't own peace," Malim said softly. "We borrow it." They slept that night on the beach, the stars wide above, the fire burning low. One man stayed awake at a time, listening for animals, for wind, for danger. But there was none, only the slow beat of the waves, the hush of fronds swaying, and the heavy, warm weight of full bellies. In the morning, they would leave, but for now, the island held them, like a mother's hands, soft, firm, and only for a moment. The island faded into the morning mist, like a dream disappearing at the edge of wakefulness. Only the scent of boiled lentils and soft herbs remained, clinging faintly to their cloaks. The beacon slipped back into the tide, its hull heavy again with careful weight. Not food this time, but silence, the restful kind earned by a safe night on land. The sea ahead shimmered gold in patches, but beneath the surface waited something sharp. Malim raised one hand and said the word quietly. Coral. There were no warning signs in the water, no floating markers, no buoys or bells, only the shift in color, blue-green to pale jade, and the subtle trembling of waves. That broke without wind. That meant reef. Long fingers of ancient coral, reaching up like broken teeth, to test the foolish or the hurried. One wrong turn, and the ship would crack its belly open. The crew slowed their pace. No one touched the sail. Only Malim held the rudder, with both hands, as gently as one holds the back of a sleeping child's neck. He squinted at the sea, not above it, but through it. He called softly to Bashir, "Fetch the carved pole." Bashir brought it, a long wooden staff, etched with shallow grooves, each mark measuring depth in hand-widths. Idil watched as Malim dipped the pole into the sea ahead, then again, and again, a rhythm, dip, lift, mark. Whispers followed each reading. 7, 5, 4.5. When it dropped to 3, the boat turned, soft as breath. No shouting, no rush, only respect. The sun climbed higher. Still, the coral field continued. They passed spires that glittered like bone beneath water, and flat reefs dusted with pink algae that swirled like silk scarves when disturbed. At one point, Ideal leaned over the edge and gasped. Below them, a labyrinth of stone towers and tunnels, flashing with schools of silver fish. It was beautiful and deadly. Bashir murmured, "The sea builds palaces for those it hopes never to leave." By midday, Malim began to hum a slow tune, one with no words. It matched the rhythm of the boat, matched the dip and lift of the guiding pole, matched the beat of the sea. It was a sailing chant, one his mother sang to him when he was too small to read stars, but big enough to feel fear. Now he hummed it for the boat, and for the coral, and for himself. The crew followed suit, not singing, but aligning their movements with the tune. Baskets shifted, ropes were passed. The wind, noticing the calm aboard, lowered its voice to a whisper. By the time the coral field ended, the sun had dipped slightly, and in its place came a breeze scented with cloves and dried bark. A sign. A trade port was nearby. But more than that, they had made it. The coral had not bitten. The sea had let them pass. That night, the crew gathered on deck. They did not cook, only ate what remained from the island: cold bread, shaved coconut, a final lentil cake split 6 ways. But they smiled, not for fullness, but for the quiet pride of having outwitted a danger older than their oldest ancestor. Before sleep, Malim whispered to Ideal, "One day, the coral will shift again. What is safe today may not be safe tomorrow. But a calm hand, a listening heart, they will always find a path." And with that, the boy closed his eyes. The deck warm beneath him, the stars stitched above like a net, holding him gently in the dark. The stars dimmed as the first brush of light spilled across the water. Not bright, but a soft silver hue that turned every ripple to silk. The beading moved with purpose now. The storm behind them, the coral fields behind them. Now came the next great test. People. Malim stood barefoot at the prow, his eyes on the distant blur of land. A new coast, unfamiliar, not hostile, but unknown. He turned to his crew and said, "We will not come empty-handed." In the ancient traditions of the coast, when a sailor arrived at a foreign harbor, he did not ask for passage with coin. He asked with kindness, with food. And so, quietly, they began to prepare a meal. The last of the lentils were rinsed in seawater drawn fresh that morning. Coconut shavings were mixed with salt and pounded gently in a woven bowl. Bashir crumbled dried fish flakes, saved carefully since the 3rd day, into the pot. A stew began to simmer. Not large, not rich, but honest. Ideal sliced soft herbs they had gathered on the island. His small hands moved carefully, not wasting a leaf. When the pot was ready, they wrapped it in palm leaves, tied with rope made of bark thread. Malim dipped a cloth into the seawater and wiped the edge of the beaden's hull, a sign of respect. "This food," he said, "is not to fill bellies. It is to open doors." As they neared the harbor, the coastline resolved itself into low, dusty hills, studded with strange trees, shorter than coconut palms, but broader, like open hands reaching upward. A small fishing village appeared, not stone, just thatched roofs, and long, bent piers, held together with rope and hope. Children stood barefoot at the end of the dock, holding fish lines. Old women stirred pots. Men watched quietly, eyes shaded beneath folded cloths. Malim raised his hand, palm forward, no weapons. He held the wrapped bundle in both arms, cradled like a sleeping infant. The boat docked with a hush. No thump, no call. One by one, the crew stepped out. No one spoke. The village elder came forward. A woman, her face like aged bark, lined with the sun's history. Malim bowed low, then extended the food with both hands. She took it, smelled the bundle, and smiled, just slightly. Then she nodded. The village did not clap. There were no cheers, just motion. A mat was brought out. Water was poured into clay cups. A young girl came forward and placed a flower at the foot of Malim's staff. It was done. They were welcomed, not as traders, not yet as friends, but as people who knew the old ways. The crew was allowed to rest beneath a shelter. They did not sleep, but sat cross-legged, listening to the hum of the village. Roosters cried. Wind played with cooking smoke. Children's footsteps tapped across the sand. When food was brought to them, they ate it slowly, not because they were starving, but because it had been shared. Ideal, his mouth full of unfamiliar spiced rice, whispered to Malim, "Why didn't we bring coin instead?" Malim smiled softly. Coin buys silence. Food speaks. And indeed, without a word more, they were invited to refill their water gourds, to stretch beneath the wide shade trees, to trade dry bark and cloth for smoked fish and honeyed dates. As dusk approached, they would not stay, but they left behind an impression, not of strength, not of wealth, but of respect, and of the way food, warm, simple, and honest, could bridge oceans. No sail ever could. They set sail again before night could fold in too deeply. The villagers had offered them a final bowl of sticky rice, laced with crushed dates and a thread of coconut milk. A quiet parting gift. Nothing was said, but the warmth in the elder's gaze told them they were remembered. Malim returned to the helm. His hands touched the rudder like old parchment, familiar and worn. The sea stretched ahead again, but this time with a warning. "There is a river beneath the ocean here," said one of the villagers, just before they left. A current, not a visible thing, but a force that ran deep beneath the surface, strong enough to pull a boat off course for miles. If the sailor didn't listen, it moved like a sleeping whale, silent and massive, but there was a way to see it, if you were taught. The villagers had shown Malim a trick, old as the trade winds. They handed him a small gourd, tightly sealed with wax. Inside was a thick, sour paste, fermented tamarind. Idil wrinkled his nose. It smelled like rot and smoke, but the elder had smiled and whispered, "This will tell you the sea's breath." As the boat drifted into open water, Malim scooped a pinch of the tamarind paste and dropped it into a cup of seawater. The crew leaned in, watching. The paste began to unravel, not dissolve. but stretch. Thin tendrils reached out, in one direction only, southwest. "That way," Malem murmured. "The water runs deeper, faster. We follow its edge." Bashir looked at the sky. "But the wind wants northeast." Malem only nodded. "Then we balance. Let the wind lift. Let the water guide." For the next few hours, the boat sailed between two invisible forces, the wind at their backs, the current pulling sideways beneath. The rudder groaned gently, as Malem made slow, careful corrections. One rope tightened, another loosened. Ideal watched him work, with wide eyes. "Is this what sailing is?" Malem smiled. "This is what listening is." By afternoon, the sky was dappled with clouds, like ashes floating on blue silk. The boat tilted gently, not in panic, but in respect. The sea began to hum again, low and constant. The tamarind compass was used 3 more times. Each time, the pace drifted slightly, but always in the same bend. The crew began to understand. Currents did not lie, but they did require patience. They passed a drifting log, barnacled and heavy. A sea turtle swam beside them for half an hour, surfacing only twice. And once, just once, a dark fin broke the surface far ahead. But it vanished as quickly as it came. Ideal clutched his scarf. Malem said nothing, only steered true. That night, dinner was simple. Dry bread softened with warm water, and dried mango soaked until tender. No one asked for more. The day had fed them in other ways. The crew lay down across the planks, some on folded cloth, some directly on wood. The stars above pulsed like slow drumbeats. Bashir, still awake, whispered into the dark, "I never knew tamarind could guide a ship." Malem's voice answered, soft and low. "When something ferments, it remembers the currents it's known. That's why the sea listens to it." Sleep came gently. The boat rocked in a rhythm older than thought. And below them, the deep river in the ocean flowed on, carrying their stories, as surely as it carried their weight. The morning tide brought a stillness, not found on land, not silence, but the soft hush of the world breathing slowly. The sun rose without fire, wrapped in mist, a pale, peach disk, painting the waves with silver threads. The beacon creaked as it drifted, not with struggle, but with memory. Malem stirred at the rudder, his eyes tracing the edge of the horizon. And then he saw it, a shape, not a wave, not driftwood, something worn by time, but not swallowed. He tapped the mast twice, a signal. Bashir rose, followed by Ideal. Their eyes adjusted slowly to what Malem had seen. Wood, blackened, split, a shard of hull, rising half-submerged like the spine of a great beast, forgotten by the sea. They veered closer. It was the bones of a ship, long since wrecked, half taken by the tide, half surrendered to the wind. The planks were lashed with an unfamiliar binding, not rope, but something thinner, twisted fiber. Malem murmured, "Not from our coast, too fine for bark, perhaps banana leaf cordage." Bashir leaned over the side. "Is it cursed?" Malem did not answer. He simply closed his eyes, and the boat slowed. Around the wreck, the water was glass, No fish moved. No breeze touched them. Idil held his breath. Below the surface, the outline of the sunken hull stretched deeper still. A long, broken vessel, curved at the ends, like a crescent moon resting on its side, and all around it, fragments, clay shards, rope, half a mast, with carvings in a script none of them knew. They floated among memory. Malem whispered. They were sailors, like us. They sought wind. They followed current. And they reached too far. The sea gave no answer. But the boat drifted closer, and something small tapped against the hull. A bowl, perfectly round, cracked, but still whole. Idil reached for it, and Malem stopped him. No, let it stay. We do not steal from the drowned. Instead, they lit a pinch of dried myrrh, and dropped it into a palm leaf cup. Smoke rose, and curled into the breeze. That had returned at last. A ritual, not of mourning, but of recognition. Malem said the words. May your mast rise in the next life. May your sail always catch the wind. And then they turned. The boat passed the wreck slowly, not in fear, but in respect. Bashir looked back. Do you think they were heading where we are? Malem's answer came without pause. All sailors seek the same horizon. Some arrive. Some remain as lessons. Idil was quiet for a long time, then asked, Will someone find us too? One day. Malem smiled. Only if we forget to listen to the sea. That night, the crew gathered close. They shared what little they had. A handful of dried dates, a wedge of goat cheese wrapped in cloth, and boiled rice softened with coconut milk. No one spoke of the wreck, but when they closed their eyes, each of them dreamed of ships, rising from beneath the water, and sails stitched with starlight. By mid-morning, a haze gathered low over the sea, blurring sky from water. The beacon moved slowly, as though uncertain of its own direction, as though the air itself was waiting. Then, through the shimmer of light, a shape emerged. An island, small, uninhabited, wrapped in stillness like a secret. No smoke, no boats, no birds above it, only silence. Malem studied it for a long while. His thumb traced the wood grain of the rudder, as though consulting an old map hidden in touch alone. We land, he said softly, not to stay, only to know. The crew did not question him. The beacon nudged gently toward the shore. Its hull scraped sand with the softness of fabric. Against a sleeping body, they stepped into the shallows, ankle-deep water, warm as breath. The island was thick with vines. Its trees bore twisted fruit. None they recognized. Red-skinned, glossy, humming faintly in the breeze. They walked in single file. Even the air felt different, heavy, as though the island hadn't been disturbed in many seasons. Then Idil saw it. The first carving. Not on a wall, not on a monument, but on the trunk of a tree. A symbol. 3 waves, crossed by a crescent line, burned deep into the bark. Bashir leaned close and whispered, Is it a warning? Malem didn't speak. He moved to the next tree. Another mark, then another. Symbols carved and charred. Some faded, some fresh, each one different, but all deliberate. In the center of the island, They found the tree. Unlike the others, it stood alone, taller, wider. Its bark was the color of ash. Its leaves glistened as though damp, even under the hot sun. Malim approached and touched it, just lightly, with the tips of his fingers. The tree bled. A thin red liquid oozed from where his skin had met the bark. Not sap, not resin. It looked a human. Ideal stepped back. His voice trembled. "Is it alive?" Malim exhaled slowly. "All trees are alive, but this one remembers." He dipped a cloth into the liquid, not to collect it, but to leave a mark, a sign they had been there. On a nearby stone, he drew a single line, then a crescent. Then they turned back. They did not speak much on the walk to the boat. The air felt different now, thicker. Bashir broke the silence. "Why would someone carve signs on trees?" Malim replied, "Because trees don't forget. Stone may break, but wood grows around memory." When they reached the shore, a single bird landed near the boat, a grey heron, silent and still. Malim nodded at it. "We're remembered now. Let's go." That evening, the crew sat in quiet thought. Dinner was simple: roasted yam slices and slivers of preserved lemon. They ate slowly, listening to the lapping water. No stories tonight, only breath. And above them, stars blinked one by one into place, each a symbol carved into the sky. The sea that evening was unnaturally still. No gulls, no spray, no slap of wave against hull, only the soft creak of the beaten's joints, and the far-off hum of something human, a sound, like a chant carried on the back of the wind, faint, but unmistakable. It did not come from the sky, nor the depths. It floated, drifted, and then faded, then rose again. Malim stood still at the mast, his eyes half-lidded, listening. "It's not the wind," he said gently. "It's memory." Bashir whispered, "I hear it too, like a voice, but not speaking words." The sound didn't pull them forward. It welcomed them, as if the ocean itself were calling out softly, singing in its own forgotten tongue. Then Ideal saw it first. He pointed. There, floating, a small raft, far out ahead. No sail, no oars, just a flat, wooden square, gently rocking, as though it belonged nowhere. Malim adjusted the sail, not toward it, just near enough to drift by, close enough to see, without disturbing. As they approached, the sound grew louder, but no voice spoke it. It rose from the air, from the sea foam, from within. The raft was simple, no more than 4 logs lashed together, but at its center rested a single object. Not a lantern, not food, not coin or sailcloth. A mask, made of something bone-white. Not ivory, not shell, smooth as moonlight, featureless, but for 2 eye-holes, and a single carved spiral at the brow. And it was dry, perfectly dry, as if the sea had chosen not to touch it. Ideal leaned forward. Why would someone leave this? Malim didn't blink. Some say sailors place their fears on rafts, to let the sea carry them away. Others say they leave behind the faces they wore, before they saw too much. Bashia's voice was soft. "Which is it, do you think?" Malim closed his eyes. "Both. And neither." They watched it pass. The raft did not tilt. The mask did not slide. It drifted past like a fallen star, still glowing in a pool of water. They made no move to collect it, not out of fear, out of reverence. As the raft faded behind them, the chant slowly fell away too. Malim whispered into the darkening sky, "May the one who wore that mask have found peace somewhere deeper." That night, they didn't anchor. They drifted, letting the boat move with the sea's soft breath. Dinner was humble, a pinch of dried fish and sweet millet porridge, but it felt sacred somehow, like they'd shared a meal with something unseen. No one spoke of the raft, but each one of them, in their own quiet thoughts, wondered what burdens they might one day send off on their own drifting raft. Sleep came easily, as the sea gently cradled the beacon, and stars above blinked like watchful eyes, and below, the water moved in long, silent currents, carrying stories too heavy for memory, but never too heavy for the tide. The sky was lavender at dawn. A soft, colorless breeze passed over the deck, carrying with it the smell of warm salt and something faintly sweet, like dried fig skins or old parchment left in the sun. Bashir stirred first. The others still slept, limbs draped across sailcloth and folded robes. He rubbed his eyes and looked over the side of the beacon, then stilled. "Malim," he whispered, "come, look." The sea was dotted, not with birds, not with driftwood, but with glass bottles, each bobbing gently in the water like a string of lanterns following the current. One, then another, then 12, then more, dozens, all sizes, some wide and squat, others long and narrow, some green, some clear, some clouded by time. The boat slowed as they approached the floating trail. Idil, now awake, leaned out with a net, and gently scooped one from the water. Inside, a scrap of parchment, stained, folded, but intact. They held their breath. With careful fingers, Malim opened the bottle, tipped it, and let the damp parchment slide into his palm. No maps, no names, only a single line of text, written in a hand soft with age. I gave her the ring, and she wept, though I did not know why. Silence. Then another bottle, another line. He still dreams of the storm, though it never came. The bottles drifted all around them, like breadcrumbs dropped by time itself, each one a story, or a piece of one. They began collecting more, not greedily, but with the reverence of monks gathering lost prayers. The fish sang that day. Only I heard it. We buried the spoon with him, just in case. She said the stars were closer on that part of the sea. No one believed her, but she danced anyway. Malim read each fragment aloud, his voice a slow rhythm against the gentle slosh of the water. The crew sat in a quiet circle, surrounded by bottles. Not a message among them explained the rest. No names, no dates, just the bones of forgotten tales. At last, Malim closed his eyes. "Do you know what these are?" he asked softly. Idil shook her head. "Not confessions," Malim said. "Not cries for rescue. These are memories, too small for the world, but too heavy for the heart. One bottle contained only a feather, another a twisted bead of silver. One held a scrap of fabric that smelled faintly of cinnamon. None explained themselves. And yet, they didn't need to. The sea had kept them, preserved them, carried them from one heart to another. Bashir whispered, "Do we keep them?" Malim shook his head. "No. We return them. They're not ours. They've reached us. And that is enough." They uncorked each bottle again, one by one, and let the fragments return to the water. The boat drifted on, the bottles dancing in their wake like stars, loosed from the sky. Idil closed her eyes, and in her mind she imagined the people behind each story: a woman dancing, a boy giving a ring, a sailor burying a spoon, all of them still living on the tide. That night the crew ate quietly, fried lentils with cloves, and a handful of tamarind-soaked rice. No one said much, but every few minutes someone would look over the edge of the beacon, half hoping another bottle might appear. Just one more, a secret adrift, waiting to be found. The sea had grown darker by late evening, not with clouds, but with a curious hush. Even the sky seemed uncertain, as if the stars were holding their breath. The crew of the beacon had grown used to the ocean's voices, the rhythmic slap of waves, the creak of rope, the breath of wind through the sail. But tonight there was a new sound, a hum, low, deep, felt more than heard. And then the lights began. Idil saw them first. She leaned over the side of the boat, eyes narrowed in the dimness. Below the surface, far down in the black-blue depths, something shimmered. At first it looked like stars reflected on water. But no, the sky was cloudy. There were no stars. These lights came from beneath, pale blue, soft green, occasionally golden, and they flickered, like torches being passed from hand to hand, in slow, silent procession. Bashir leaned beside her. "Is it fish?" Malim stood slowly, his face unreadable. "No, not fish." The lights grew more defined. They were not scattered, not random. They followed a pattern. Straight lines, curving loops, crossing paths, like streets, seen from a mountaintop. The boat slowed, unasked, as if the sea wanted them to stay. The crew gathered at the rail, peering down into the strange, silent glow. The lights did not rise. They remained far below, but clearly shaped. Structures, archways, outlines of buildings long forgotten. "A city," Idil whispered, "under the sea." Malim didn't blink. "There are stories," he said, "of places that were swallowed, not by war, not by fire, but by time and tide." One light flared brighter than the rest, a circle of soft gold, glowing directly beneath the boat. As they watched, a single object rose from the depths, slow, graceful, weightless. It drifted upward like a leaf in a dream. When it reached the surface, Idil reached in and gently pulled it aboard. A bowl, stone, or something like it, etched with spirals and dots. Inside, a smooth, clear bead, cool to the touch, faintly pulsing with the same golden glow. Malim studied it. "Not a gift," he said softly, "a reminder." Bashir looked over the edge. Reminder of what? That not everything sinks, Malin murmured. Some stories rise again, when the world is ready to see them. They placed the bowl at the center of the deck, not as treasure, but as a witness. The sea below them slowly dimmed. The city's lights faded, one by one. The final glow vanished just before dawn, like the last note of a lullaby. They drifted on in silence, the sky slowly turning from charcoal to pale gold. The bowl stayed still. So did the bead. No one touched it again. At breakfast, they broke bread soaked in olive oil, sprinkled with dry thyme. A simple meal, shared in quiet awe. Idil whispered, "Maybe it wasn't a city at all. Maybe we only saw what we needed to." Malim smiled gently. "The sea has many faces. Sometimes it shows us our own." The sky was pale and unmoving. Clouds sat still like brushstrokes that had forgotten how to shift. The sea itself had become mirror-like, not flat with calm, but heavy with waiting. There was no wind, no push, no pull. Even the sail of the beacon hung limp, folded in on itself, like a sleeping wing. It was Malim who first heard it. A sound, neither near nor far, not from above, not from the water. It seemed to float between the planks of the boat, threading softly into the stillness. A tune. No words, only notes, low and slow, drifting like the curl of smoke from a quiet fire. Idil tilted her head. She blinked and whispered, "Is someone singing?" But there was no voice, only the music, as though a flute were being played, somewhere just beyond the visible world. Bashir moved to the sail. Though there was no wind, the canvas trembled gently, not from motion, but from vibration, as though the sail itself had become a living ear, or a memory. Malim said nothing for a long time. He closed his eyes, and let the sound move through him. Then he spoke. "There's an old tale," he said softly, "of a melody left unfinished. A sailor who whistled half a song, then vanished, and the ocean, ever since, tries to hum the rest." The tune shifted. It grew brighter, but no louder, still calm, like a lullaby meant to be heard only by the sea itself. And yet, it seemed to invite something, a direction, a path. The sail began to lift, not with wind, with music. Softly, the beacon began to move again, drawn forward by a breeze that was not made of air, but of rhythm. They didn't question it, not because they understood, but because understanding no longer felt necessary. As the boat moved, the music shifted too. It seemed to loop in waves, like breath, rising, falling. Every few minutes, a new sound joined, a note like the rustle of dried leaves, or the whisper of fingers across hollow wood. It didn't feel ghostly. It felt old, as though the world itself had once sung more often, and this was simply a forgotten echo, remembering how to breathe. Idil moved to the edge of the boat, and began to hum along. She didn't know the notes, but her body remembered them. Bashir closed his eyes and tapped gently on the rim of a clay bowl, matching the pulse. And for 1 hour, no one spoke. They let the melody carry them. No compass, no destination, only the sea. and the song it held. Then, as suddenly as it began, the music faded, not vanished, just placed back into the water, like a pearl returned to sand. The boat slowed, and the sail folded again into rest. No wind, no sound, only silence. But it was a full silence now, like the last moment of a dream, before waking, when you still remember the feeling, even if the memory fades. They did not ask where they had gone. They only knew they were somewhere new, inside themselves, and upon the sea. Dinner that night was boiled lentils with pickled lemon. The meal tasted sweeter, though no one had added sugar, and as the stars appeared, Idil traced a melody across the wooden rail with her fingertip, letting it linger there, in case the ocean wished to hum again. Morning came like a warm breath. The beadle drifted gently across a sea that shimmered not with sun, but with a strange green glow, a glow that pulsed softly beneath the waves, as if the ocean itself were cradling something ancient. Idil leaned over the edge of the vessel and blinked. What she saw wasn't fish. It wasn't light reflecting from the sky. It was kelp, vast, wide swaths of it, tangling, curling, weaving like underwater hair. But this kelp glowed, a soft green blue, like moss lit from within. It stretched as far as they could see, a great swaying forest beneath the surface, and the beadle was drifting right over it. Bashir reached for a net, but Malim placed a gentle hand on his wrist. "No," he said softly, "not yet. Let it tell us what it wants." The sea was utterly calm. Even the waves seemed hushed, as though they, too, were listening. Idil, ever curious, dipped her hand in the water. It came out warm, warmer than it should have been, and on her fingers, a soft shimmer. Tiny flecks of phosphorescence clung to her skin, then faded like dreams just before waking. Malim stood at the bow and closed his eyes. "There's something here," he murmured. "Not buried, not lost, just waiting." The boat slowed. Beneath them, the kelp parted, as though welcoming an old friend. And there, rising slowly from the green, was a shape, round, stone, marked by time, a grinding bowl, worn smooth on the inside, the edges chipped with centuries of use. Resting beside it, a pestle still in place, as if someone had just stepped away. Bashir's voice was almost a whisper. "It's a kitchen. Not just a kitchen," Malim said. "A place of remembering." And as he spoke, more shapes rose from the kelp. A row of small clay jars, a wooden ladle, the half-rotted frame of a table. Not wreckage, remains. From a floating kitchen, a ship long forgotten, perhaps once used by sailors like them, women, perhaps, gathering sea herbs, boiling lentils over flame, grinding dried spices under the open sky. Idil leaned forward. Her voice was barely a breath. They cooked here. Someone loved someone here. No one disagreed. In the soft green silence, they let the scene unfold in their minds. The steam, the laughter, the smells of cumin, vinegar, and salt. A girl tying her scarf against the wind. A boy offering a carved spoon as a gift. Perhaps it wasn't even a tragedy. Perhaps they just moved on, left the tools behind, believing they would return. And the sea, as it often does, simply kept them safe. Malem dipped a ladle into the water beside the kelp. It came up full of clear seawater, but inside the bowl was something else. A single lentil, unbroken, whole, softened by time, unspoiled. He passed it gently to Ideal, and she held it like a pearl. "No need to eat it," Malem said. "It's not for hunger. It's for remembering." They did not take anything from the scene. Instead, they placed a small item of their own, a folded scrap of linen from the boat's stores, into the kelp forest below. An offering, a way of saying, "I see you. I, too, have loved someone across a meal." The kelp glowed slightly brighter, as if it accepted the gift. And then, the current stirred again. The boat moved forward. As they passed out of the glowing green patch, no one spoke for a while. The silence was not heavy. It was warm, like the silence after a good meal, shared with family. That night, they boiled millet with dried fig, and stirred in a handful of sea salt, and they ate slowly, in honor of hands they would never meet, but somehow still knew. The sun rose slowly that morning, wrapped in a veil of silver mist. It did not blaze. It glowed. The beacon glided forward on an invisible tide, as if the sea itself had decided to carry them. No oars, no sail, just motion, calm and steady. Ideal was the first to spot it. A piece of wood, floating alone in the distance. As they neared, she reached out and gently pulled it aboard. It wasn't just driftwood. It had been carved, lines and symbols worked into its surface. By hand, with care. The wood was smooth, but not water-worn. It was preserved, and on it, in faint but precise shapes, was the image of a hand, offering a bowl upward, not to a person, but to the open sky. More pieces followed. One by one, the sea offered them, long planks, thin beams, small blocks, all carved, all with soft, simple symbols. A fish with wings, a crescent moon above a wave, a kneeling figure beneath a tree. None of them were heavy. Each floated beside the beacon, as though waiting to be chosen. Malem didn't speak at first. He knelt at the center of the deck, gathering the pieces together, arranging them in a small circle. Each was placed with intention, like placing candles in a quiet room, or stones around a grave. Ideal watched him, her hands folded. "What is it?" she asked softly. "A shrine," he said, "made to float, to be found, not to be worshipped, but to remind." Bashir furrowed his brow. "Remind who?" "Anyone who needs it." They worked together, wordlessly. No nails, no ropes, just balance. The pieces fit naturally, clicking into place, as if they remembered how they once stood. Soon, a small circle stood upon the deck, open in the middle, a space for thought, or memory, or peace. Inside it, Malem placed a small round stone, etched with a spiral. Ideal added a dried fig, its skin slightly wrinkled but sweet. Bashir, after a long pause, removed a bracelet of twine from his wrist, and laid it beside the fig. The sea around them was utterly still. The waves seemed to hush themselves, as though not to disturb what was becoming sacred. No prayers were spoken aloud, but each crew member closed their eyes. For a few minutes, They simply breathed, listened, let their thoughts rise and fall, like the tide itself, and then, as if stirred by an invisible current, the shrine lifted, softly, gently, not blown away, but carried. It floated from the deck, and drifted beside the boat, still intact, still balanced. They watched in silence, as it moved away, not toward land, not toward storm, just onward. Like all sacred things, it did not ask to be understood, only noticed, respected, and as it drifted, Idil whispered, "I hope it finds someone." Malim smiled. "It already has." The boat moved on, the water below gleaming with faint silver ripples. No one looked back. They didn't need to. Somewhere in the space between silence and the sea, they had left behind something more lasting than sound. A shrine built not just of wood, but of intention. That night, they ate barley with roasted garlic and fennel seeds. A humble meal, taken slowly. Before sleep, Idil lit a tiny wick in an oil dish, and placed it by the mast. No words were spoken, but the flame danced, and seemed to remember. The sea that evening was unnaturally still. No gulls, no spray, no slap of wave against hull, only the soft creak of the beaten's joints, and the far-off hum of something human, a sound, like a chant carried on the back of the wind, faint, but unmistakable. It did not come from the sky, nor the depths. It floated, drifted, and then faded, then rose again. Malim stood still at the mast, his eyes half-lidded, listening. "It's not the wind," he said gently. "It's memory." Bashir whispered, "I hear it too, like a voice, but not speaking words." The sound didn't pull them forward. It welcomed them, as if the ocean itself were calling out softly, singing in its own forgotten tongue. Then Idil saw it first. He pointed. There, floating, a small raft, far out ahead. No sail, no oars, just a flat, wooden square, gently rocking, as though it belonged nowhere. Malim adjusted the sail, not toward it, just near enough to drift by, close enough to see, without disturbing. As they approached, the sound grew louder, but no voice spoke it. It rose from the air, from the sea foam, from within. The raft was simple, no more than 4 logs lashed together, but at its center rested a single object, not a lantern, not food, not coin or sailcloth, a mask, made of something bone-white, not ivory, not shell, smooth as moonlight, featureless, but for 2 eye-holes, and a single carved spiral at the brow. And it was dry, perfectly dry, as if the sea had chosen not to touch it. Idil leaned forward. Why would someone leave this? Malim didn't blink. Some say sailors place their fears on rafts, to let the sea carry them away. Others say they leave behind the faces they wore, before they saw too much. Bashir's voice was soft. "Which is it, do you think?" Malim closed his eyes. "Both. And neither." They watched it pass. The raft did not tilt. The mask did not slide. It drifted past like a fallen star, still glowing in a pool of water. They made no move to collect it, not out of fear, out of reverence. As the raft faded behind them, the chant slowly fell away too. Malim whispered into the darkening sky, "May the one who wore that mask have found peace somewhere deeper." That night, they didn't anchor. They drifted, letting the boat move with the sea's soft breath. Dinner was humble, a pinch of dried fish and sweet millet porridge, but it felt sacred somehow, like they'd shared a meal with something unseen. No one spoke of the raft, but each one of them, in their own quiet thoughts, wondered what burdens they might one day send off on their own drifting raft. Sleep came easily, as the sea gently cradled the beacon, and stars above blinked like watchful eyes, and below, the water moved in long, silent currents, carrying stories too heavy for memory, but never too heavy for the tide. The sea had gone glassy. It no longer danced. It held its breath. Clouds rolled above like slow-turning parchment, and the beacon slipped quietly across the stillness, each creak of the boat like a heartbeat, each breath like a page turning. Idil sat at the stern, her fingers trailing in the water. Something brushed them. She looked down. A bottle, long, slim, sealed with a wax-stained cork, and swaddled in seaweed like a gift left at the ocean's doorstep. She drew it from the sea with both hands. Salt crust clung to its glass skin. Inside, curled gently like a sleeping child, was a slip of yellowed paper. They all gathered around. Malim used his blade to loosen the cork, then poured the seawater from the bottle with care. The letter slipped out, wet, but intact. They laid it across the warm deck, and let the sun do its slow magic. When it had dried enough to be touched, Bashir gently unfolded it, and there, in fine, careful lines, was a script none of them recognized. The letters curled like fishhooks. Some floated, some sank below the lines. All of it looked ancient, personal. Idil stared at the writing, then closed her eyes. "I can't read it," she said, "but I know what it says." Malim smiled softly. "Go on." And so she spoke. Not a translation, but a listening. "It says," she began, "my hands still smell of cumin and honey. The night we left, I tucked dried herbs into the folds of your dress. I don't know if you noticed. You were already weeping." She paused. "The sea is not cruel. It simply remembers nothing. But I do. I remember the way you touched your necklace, when you didn't want me to see you cry. I remember the stew you made the day before we fled. It was too salty, but I ate every spoonful." The others listened in stillness. Bashir's brow furrowed, as though he, too, could hear the voice in the bottle. Idil continued, "If this bottle finds you, know that the mangoes still ripen on the southern cliff. Know that the goats still follow the sound of your flute. Know that I left the small clay bowl where you used to kneel, and I have not touched it since." She opened her eyes. "I don't know who wrote it," she said, "but I feel like I've missed them too." Malim ran a finger across the paper's lines. "I think it was never meant to be understood," he whispered, "only heard." He folded the letter again, not too tightly, with care, then placed it in a dry jar, alongside dried hibiscus and cloves, not preserved, but honored, and tucked the jar deep into the boat's wooden chest, not hidden, just kept. That evening they cooked something simple, soft lentils with dates, a touch of cinnamon. Idil stirred the pot with a slow hand, watching the steam rise. "The bottle came to us for a reason," she said. "Not because we needed the message, but because we'd remember it." Bashir sipped from a wooden spoon. "It tastes like longing." And Malim, gazing out at the sea, replied, "Then it's perfect." The fog came suddenly, not like a storm, but like a curtain. It rolled in from the east, smooth and pale, soft as flour sifted over still water. Within minutes, the horizon vanished. The sun became a hazy disk, and the sea lost its shimmer. Everything turned hushed, as if wrapped in linen. The crew moved slowly. The beacon glided forward, guided only by the creak of its own ribs, and the soft lap of waves. They spoke less. They breathed softer. Even the gulls had vanished. Then they saw it. A shadow. A silhouette. Still and waiting. Bashir blinked. "Is that a boat?" It was. Larger than theirs. Made of dark wood, blackened in places, tethered to nothing. No sail, no flag, no sound, just floating in the fog, like it had been waiting for them. As they drew near, Idil reached for the side, and placed her palm against its hull. It was warm. Malim was the first to board. He moved like a man entering a shrine, slow, barefoot, eyes lowered. The deck was covered in dried petals, hibiscus, rose, and tiny violet-blue blossoms. They did not know by name. The air smelled of clove and something deeper, cinnamon, perhaps, or cardamom softened by time. In the center of the deck, a low brass lantern flickered, still burning, its wick barely alive, its flame steady as breath. There were no crew, no signs of struggle, no birds nesting, only calm. They stepped below deck, guided by the thin scent trail of spice. Inside, jars lined the walls, neatly labeled. Every surface was clean. A bowl of dry rice sat untouched. A cup of tea had cooled to stillness long ago, and in the center of a wooden table, a folded cloth napkin, with a single line stitched in gold thread. "We are not lost. We are remembered." Idil ran her hand across the seam. The napkin felt freshly laundered. There was something timeless about this place, as if it existed outside the map, outside the tide. Bashir lifted a jar, filled with candied ginger. He opened it, sniffed, then replaced it gently. "They cooked with joy," he murmured. Malim knelt beside a basket of oranges, dried and fragrant. "I think they left on purpose," he said. "Left the boat?" Idil asked. He shook his head. "No, left the world." They gathered on the deck again, beside the flickering brass lamp. Malim drew a circle of chalk around it, not to trap it, but to frame it, to say, "We see you, we thank you." Then, in silence, they placed a spoonful of dried mint, a fig, and 3 grains of rice on a shallow dish beside the flame. An offering, a memory, a hello to someone unseen. When they returned to their own boat, the fog had not lifted, but it had changed. It no longer felt like silence. It felt like protection, like a secret held close. As they pushed away, the spice ship faded into the mist, its light, still burning, became a star among clouds. Ideal rested her head on a coiled rope. She smelled of cloves, and felt, oddly, safe. Dinner that night was spiced rice with a touch of dried fruit. Simple, sacred, warm. That night, something changed. There was no sound of water, no sway beneath the boat, no creaking timbers, just stillness. Ideal awoke first. The air felt thin, like the breath before dawn. She stood and stepped barefoot onto the deck, and gasped. The beacon wasn't floating. It was resting, perfectly still, on something smooth, dark, and infinite. Not land, not sea. It was as if the ocean had turned to glass, but not the kind you walk on. Below the boat was a perfect reflection of the sky. Stars blinked in every direction. Above and beneath, there was no horizon, only an endless bowl of midnight, pierced by light. It was as though the boat were suspended between two skies. The rest of the crew joined her, one by one, each stepping softly into the impossible, none speaking at first. Bashir knelt at the edge, his face reflected beside a constellation. He reached down, and felt nothing, no chill of water, no ripple, just emptiness that shimmered. "Where is the sea?" he whispered. Malim gazed outward, his voice calm. "We are sailing memory now." They looked to the stars, not as guides, but as companions. Each one seemed to glow more deeply than usual. Some twinkled like bells, others pulsed like breath. Then, slowly, faint lines of light connected them, a constellation map drawn across the sky, and reflected below. But these were not the constellations they knew, not the fisherman, not the gazelle, not the dhow. These were softer, older, a bowl, a bundle of herbs, a woman seated with a pot in her lap. "It's the map of meals," Ideal whispered. "What we've eaten, what others cooked before us, what's remembered through food." Bashir tilted his head. "That one," he pointed, "looks like a mango split in half." They laughed gently. It echoed softly across the mirrored stillness. 4 hours, they sat on the deck, pointing, whispering, remembering. They saw a stew pot with curling steam, a fig, opened like a secret, a hand passing bread to another, each star a taste, each constellation a shared moment. No one was hungry that night, but Malim made a small tea anyway, just warm water, cardamom, and dried basil. They drank in silence, watching their own movements reflected below, as if the sea itself had become their shadow. Ideal stretched out, staring upward. She did not know if she was looking at the sky, or into herself. The stars seemed to blink slower now, almost drowsy, and then, just as softly as it had come, a ripple formed. The sky beneath them shivered. The boat rocked. A whisper of wind returned. The mirrored world melted back into the sea. The stars remained only above, and beneath them, waves. Ordinary, gentle, breathing waves. Malim smiled. "The sea never leaves. It just gives us space to see." Ideal nodded. "It showed us the stories, the ones we forget when we eat in silence." That night, they wrapped themselves in light shawls. The stars above them once more outnumbered the waves. But they knew now. Those stars lived in every spoonful they'd ever shared. The sea was quiet again, but not silent. It whispered, each wave a hush, each breeze a sigh, like someone just beginning to speak, after a long, thoughtful pause. By mid-morning, the sun hung high, its light pale and diffused, as though viewed through a curtain of silk. Then, far ahead, they saw it. A shape. Not land. Not a boat. Just a sliver on the water. As they drew closer, they realized it was a raft, and upon it sat a man, cross-legged, calm, holding a basket of lemons. He looked old, not frail, but ancient in the way cliffs are ancient. His beard was long, braided with tiny shells. His robes were sea-stained, and sun-faded, the same blue-grey as the water around him. But his eyes were clear. He watched them approach, with no alarm, only recognition, as if he'd been expecting them. Malim hailed him gently. The man raised a hand, then lifted the basket into view. "Lemons," he said, his voice rough as driftwood, for sailors who have forgotten what sharpness tastes like. They pulled the beadon alongside. No rope, no anchor. The raft simply floated beside them, like it had always belonged there. Idil leaned over the side. "Are you alone?" she asked softly. The man smiled. "No one at sea is ever truly alone." He passed them a lemon. It was firm, fragrant, still warm from the sun. Idil sliced it open with her small blade. Its scent was brighter than anything they'd smelled in days. They passed slices among themselves, each bite sharp, clean, awakening. Bashir winced, then laughed. "It burns." The old man nodded. "That is the point. To remember the edge of flavor. To return to yourself." They shared a few dry dates in exchange, and Malim poured him a small cup of warm tea. The old man took it reverently, as though it were gold. He drank slowly, then said, "You are near the edge. Beyond this point, the sea remembers little, but it will carry you, if you carry your stories." He placed the empty cup down, then reached into a pouch at his hip. He withdrew a folded cloth map, so thin it moved like breath. He handed it to Idil. "It doesn't show land," he said, "only tastes, smells, voices." Idil opened it. There were no borders, no coastlines, only curved lines, drawn in circles, with labels like "Clove-laced wind," "Where ginger was first traded," "Bread shared in silence," "Memory of mango on the tongue." It was a map of sensory truth, a map made for those who navigate by feeling, not compass. The old man stood. His knees cracked gently. "I've waited long enough," he said, "and you've come far enough. Where will you go?" Malim asked. The man looked up, then down, as if both sky and water held options. "Forward," he said, "as do we all." And with that, he stepped off the raft, and onto the sea. Not into it, onto it. And he walked. No splash, no sink, just a man walking gently across the water, toward the east. His basket now empty, but his scent of lemons trailing behind. They watched him vanish into the haze. No one spoke for a long time. Finally, Bashir held up the lemon rind he'd saved. "I think I remember my mother's cooking," he said quietly, "and the rest of them." Nodded. That night's meal was light, just rice, lentils, and a splash of citrus. It tasted like beginning again. The wind was sweet that morning, not strong, just enough to lift the edge of a shawl, or curl a strand of hair across the cheek. Idil sat at the bow of the beadon, eyes half closed, breathing in something she couldn't name. It was smoky, but warm, not fire, not danger, something like sugar, caramelized and old. She stood suddenly. "Malim," she said, "there's something burning." He sniffed the air, then nodded. "Yes, but not destruction. This is kitchen smoke." Bashir laughed sleepily. "What kind of island cooks before we arrive?" But it was true. As the mist parted, land emerged. Not volcanic, not sandy, just strange. A stretch of shore built not from stone or coral, but from driftwood, layers upon layers, of planks, oars, broken doors, carved bowls, and fire-blackened sticks. Their boat bumped gently against the edge. No dock, no guards, only steps, stairs made from mismatched kitchen shelves, and flour-dusted cutting boards, led upward into the center of the island. The crew stepped out, feet tapping softly against the wood, and climbed. Each breath brought more scents: fennel, honey, old rosemary, something fried, something forgotten. No people, just the hum of old stoves, and the ghostly clink of ladles in bowls. In the center, they found the kitchen. It was open to the sky, a wide circle of stones arranged like a hearth, with long wooden counters, and brass pots suspended in the air, as if waiting for hands to return. Beside each pot, a book, not bound by leather, but by cloth and string, handwritten, grease-stained, loved. Malim picked one up. Its pages smelled of saffron and thyme. It read, "For those who cannot write their names, but remember every measure of salt." Idil opened another. The recipe began with, "On the day your child returns from market, fry the plantains in joy." And another, "If grief comes to the table, add cinnamon to the rice." They read in silence, turning pages with reverence. This island was not a place of people, but of practice, a shrine to the daily acts, of nourishment. Every dish written here had once been cooked and remembered. Bashir opened a third book. It contained only smells, each page infused with an oil, or powder, and a word: clove, for waiting; rosewater, for apology; vinegar, for absence; cardamom, for comfort. He closed it, eyes soft. "This place is built of memory." Malim nodded. "Recipes survive longer than kings." They did not eat while on the island. It felt inappropriate, as if eating would disturb something sacred. But before they left, Idil did one thing. She found a blank page in a cloth-bound book, and wrote, "Dried millet, stirred at dawn." She hums when she forgets the next step, but the food never fails. She didn't sign it. No need. Those who knew would feel it. As they pushed the boat gently away, the smoke faded behind them, but the scent of roasted lentils and toasted sesame lingered in their hair and on their shawls. Later that night, back on the sea, they shared only bread, but it tasted fuller somehow, as if every forgotten dish had whispered its blessing into the dhow. The sea had grown familiar again. No more phantom islands, no walking men, no mirrored skies, just waves, sun, and the gentle sway of the beacon as it sailed toward the coast they'd once left behind. But something had changed. The wind smelled like cloves and lemons. The wood of the ship creaked more kindly. And the crew, Ideal, Bashir, Malim, moved with a silence that felt full, not empty. They were not returning home. They were bringing the sea with them. They reached the harbour just after dawn. The shoreline was still asleep. No shouting merchants, no fishmongers yet, just gulls, salt, and the stretch of sand that once seemed so far away. Malim anchored the boat with a soft grunt. His hands, salt-worn and steady, rested on the wood a moment longer. Before he stood, Ideal didn't speak. She simply pressed her palm to the deck, a thank you, then stepped onto land. They didn't return to a city, not yet, not to noise or market streets. Instead, they walked, quietly, uphill, until they reached the grove. It was a place just outside the village, where fig trees grew in slow, dappled peace, where the earth was soft, and the wind rustled the leaves, like a lullaby. It was here they sat, beneath the oldest fig tree, whose branches curved like arms, and whose fruit hung full and fragrant. Bashir laid a cloth on the ground. From a small satchel he pulled what remained, a round of flatbread, a pinch of dried hibiscus, a twist of sea salt, one final lemon, soft with travel. No feast, no fire, just pieces of the journey, gathered like offerings. They sat cross-legged. The sun moved slowly overhead. Ideal tore the bread into thirds. Malim squeezed the lemon across the top. The salt pinched last, like punctuation. And they ate, not in hunger, not in ceremony, but in presence. Each bite a memory, each swallow a closing circle. The crunch of salt brought back the raft, the tartness of lemon, the walking man, the bread, the ghostly kitchen, the hibiscus, the sweetness of silence at sea. No one said much, but everything was understood. When the bread was gone, they leaned back. The fig tree offered shade, and above, the branches swayed. A ripe fig dropped near Ideal's hand. She smiled and picked it up, split it open. Inside, 1,000 tiny seeds, pink and gold, alive. She passed it to Malim. He took a small bite, then handed it to Bashir. He ate the rest. Nothing was wasted. Nothing more was needed. The story didn't end with words. It ended with breath and softness and the feeling of something deeply seen and quietly held. Somewhere in the distance, a market bell rang, a reminder that the world still turned, that people still bargained and cooked and lived. But for now, under the fig tree, everything was still. That night, Ideal wrote a single sentence into her mother's recipe book. She didn't use a pen. She pressed her finger into flour on the table and traced. We ate well, and we listened. And so, dear listener, our voyage across the ancient seas comes to a close. From the crackle of millet over the fire to the scent of lemons on the waves, we have drifted through quiet waters, sharing bread, stories, and the secret lives of those long gone. If this journey helped you rest, or let your mind sail gently into stillness, we'd be honored if you'd let us know. Water wave, before you close your eyes. Don't forget to like, subscribe, and share your thoughts in the comments below. It truly helps more sleepy souls find our little harbor. Until we meet again, may your dreams be soft, your heart full, and your night blessed with the hush of distant waters. Candle. Good night, traveler. Sleep well.